So let me guess, guilt and shame are suffocating the life out of you. They're making you feel like you deserve to be mentally paralyzed in life just because you made a mistake in your past. They make you doubt your goodness and fear your dark side. They try to convince you that you're doomed to feel like a curdled sinner who's deeply corrupted, that you're unforgivable, irredeemable, and fake. It's called Imposter Syndrome, and it's eating your soul. Now, with all that you're battling, somehow there are still amazing things that you'd love to contribute to the world during this lifetime. But you're at a standstill right now because you just can't get over the stain on your record. Look at you, up against hell, but you're still clutching your burlap pouch of flower seeds. See, I know the imposter syndrome story all too well because it's part of my story too. But I found some things that actually helped me move forward and honor my life's mission so I could start breathing life into my dreams. They allowed me to stop holding myself back, which has led me to more and more freedom. And I want to help you get there too. I know how badly you need it. These ideas may not cure your underlying problem, but they will make progress possible. If you're drowning right now, by the end of this video, you'll have at least one arm fully in the lifeboat, clutching to the side. You're no longer drowning. Get psyched about that. I'll start by saying you're probably a better person than you actually think you are. It's gonna be okay. You are going to get through this. Just know that I'm packing a ton of positive and potentially life-changing content into this video, so I am not trying to keep this one short and sweet and to the point. I am, however, trying to facilitate positive change in your life and to help you heal. So I hope you're with me on this, because I am with you. So let's look at how to shift your mindset so you can actually taste freedom, so you can finally feel worthy of bringing your beautiful gifts into the world, despite having made a mistake in your past. All right, let's rock. Firstly, I want to introduce you to the term thought loop, which I'll be referencing throughout the video. A thought loop is what happens when you're unable to resolve an issue in your mind, so you get trapped in a cycle of overthinking about it, but you never actually heal from the thing that caused the thought loop. Here's the timeline of a thought loop. A mistake is made, which is the on-ramp, then we feel guilt or shame, questions about ourselves come up, then we try to reason our way towards answers and healing, realize that we can't do that, then we panic, and then we think we're a terrible person, feel more guilt and shame, more questions arise, try to reason more, but realize we can't again, panic even more, then we think we're an even worse person than we did earlier, then we repeat the cycle ad nauseum and never actually healing. The worst part? An off-ramp just doesn't seem to exist. You can see how we get stuck in perpetual overthinking patterns that don't allow themselves to ever be resolved. As a matter of fact, thought loops don't just not solve the problem, they actually make it way worse by making you ask more and more questions about yourself when your original reasoning fails. And that just compounds over time. Ironically enough, more questions mean less answers, which means more urgency. So every trip around the circle that you do just exponentially adds more and more worry, unworthiness, and dread. Freedom quickly becomes an impossibility. The original mistake has now turned into a full-blown identity crisis. And this forces us to become hopelessly fixated on the problem and obsessed with trying to reason through it so we can heal. But we just can't do that. It won't allow it. Whatever you focus on grows, and thought loops force you to focus on them, so they just grow and grow eternally. Thought loops are also related to the bonus shift towards the end of the video, so stick around for that, because it may start to make a lot more sense if you feel like the bonus shift hits home. So what's the off-ramp from a thought loop? Well, it may actually be just changing the type of reasoning that we're working with. We get so caught up in the loop that we forget that we have access to out-of-loop thinking. And that's what I'm about to show you. Hopefully one or more of these things will click with you and help set you free. Without further ado, here are 14 ways to shift your perspective on your mistake. Perspective shift number 1. It's actually good that your emotions are working. If you made a mistake and you feel guilt or shame, to some extent, that's actually normal. Guilt and shame can feel like hell, but it's a good thing that you're feeling them. It means that your emotions are working properly. It is perfectly understandable to feel badly after doing something wrong. Those painful emotions were actually your body giving you a gift. So your body is basically saying, okay, you found the line. Now don't come back here. And now it's forcing you to remember that fact by creating the thought loop. It's not fun, but that's how important your body feels this lesson is. So feeling guilt or shame is positive to some extent, but the problem is how much you're feeling them, which is probably way too much, which is not positive. I'm willing to bet that the amount that you're feeling those things is actually unwarranted. You may think that it is due to the gravity of your mistake, but trust me, like 99% chance, you're overfeeling those things. It's not warranted. Now, I know that constantly existing in a place of pain is a problem, but the real problem would be if you did something wrong, but you didn't care. Your current suffering should be proof that your emotions are trying to help you, not harm you. I know they're doing that right now, but that's not their intention. They might be harming you right now, but that's only because they're so pervasive. They are just really insisting, trying to make damn sure that that mistake never ever happens again. But unfortunately, what your emotions end up doing is ensuring that nothing good at all ever happens again. It's kind of like in Finding Nemo. Remember when Dory says, well, you can't never let anything happen to him, then nothing would ever happen to him. Your emotions are Marlin in this case. They're just trying to protect you, but they're actually stunting your growth. Your negative emotions are on hyperdrive because your body hated that mistake so much that it's actually willing to sabotage everything else in your life to ensure that you keep that lesson. That's why your mind has been trying to reason its way through this, but it can't. Your body just won't let it. Your body might be doing this in a painful way, but it's just trying to protect you and remind you how important it feels that lesson is. Just take a moment to thank your body for flagging something that the mind didn't flag properly before you made that mistake. Say, thanks body, thanks for catching that mistake and making sure it never happens again. And while you're at it, try letting your body know that you no longer need this relentless, torturous, heavy reminder of the lesson. Just say, thank you, body. You have made your point. I don't need you to torture me to keep this lesson. I appreciate that you care, but I got it. Perspective shift number 2. Your red flag system was just weak at the time. So maybe your mind actually did flag the mistake before you made it. You knew better, but you messed up anyways, which only exacerbates the thought loop. If this is part of your story, that means that you know what it means to be a good person, but you just simply stepped outside of character for that moment, only to have your emotions check you extremely hardcore afterwards. Okay, you may have dropped the ball in that moment, but now you really know better than to make that mistake again. The pain that you're feeling is just the first step in healing. You knew that it was wrong, it was a judgment lapse for you, even if you did know better, but now you can learn from it. You're not going to win every battle, but you have to fight these battles in order to win the war. Also, even if you knew it was wrong before you made the mistake, your brain at that time didn't know how bad the feeling of making the mistake would really be. It didn't yet understand the painful gravity of the situation. It didn't understand how much this mistake was going to crush your emotions. Otherwise, it may have tried harder to stop it from happening. That mistake caused this feeling. You can avoid this feeling by not making that mistake again. Please realize that now you know how bad that feeling is. The past version of you wasn't strong enough to stop yourself, but this new version of you is strong enough to prevent that mistake from happening again. To some extent, the pain that you feel is a healthy part of your reminder, but you can't live in that pain forever. Look how exhausting it is. Try to extract the reminder from the pain, but leave the pain in the past. Leave that pain behind. I think you've learned your lesson by now. The pain is no longer necessary. Perspective shift number 3. A lower level of consciousness. Now, if the mistake was a repeat that you struggled with multiple times in the past, recognize that during those prior occurrences, you were actually operating at a lower level of consciousness that just wasn't mature enough at that time to prevent the mistake from happening a few times. Your brain didn't fully comprehend where the line was until the most recent time that you made this mistake, which is why you're feeling all this guilt and shame piling on at the moment, because you probably had a little bit of an inkling that it was wrong back then. Your brain sure as hell knows where that line is now, though, so over the course of making that mistake a few times, you grew enough to eventually understand how wrong it was. Now sure, it's not great to have repeated that mistake, but it is good to have finally found the line. Honor your newfound knowledge and don't have another repeat. One super important thing to say here is do not lean on that lower level of consciousness thing as an excuse to allow yourself to make the mistake again from here. You've grown too much since the last time you made it. Let that growth solidify. The new you is here. Look at yourself. This is 2.0 you. Allow your higher level of consciousness, this new higher you, to move on from that mistake for good. Perspective shift number 4. Maybe you actually didn't know better. So it's possible that maybe you actually didn't know better when you made that mistake. In other words, you made the mistake in innocence. If that's the case and you feel bad about it now, then just understand that you were operating at the highest possible consciousness level you could at the time, and as high as you felt that level may have been, it still wasn't enough to prevent that mistake from happening. So right after you made the mistake, your consciousness level went up immediately, right away. And now you understand your morals better. That mistake was probably necessary to figure all that out. And it's an important boundary that you just needed to grasp more clearly for some reason. Well, making that mistake makes that possible. Perspective shift number 5. Stop living in the past. Your brain is constantly punishing you for the mistake, even though it's probably been time for you to move on. Your emotions are trapped in a time capsule. But remember, it was a past version of you that made that mistake. You weren't as wise or as strong as you are right now. You have grown so much through the pain of having made this mistake, even if you don't realize that yet. Don't eternally flog yourself for the sins of your prior life. Realize that your past self was a lower life form, and you are now a more ascended being. But you're still torturing yourself like you're the lower life form. What kind of sense does that make? I mean, I get it because I've done it, but wrong. You have transcended since then. You were that person. You don't have to be that person now. Think about it like this. If a puppy bit your finger, would you scream at it and punish it every single day for the rest of its whole life? No, of course not. If you're still suffering with the feelings of guilt and shame surrounding the memory of that mistake, that probably means that you're still operating from the feelings of guilt and shame that you had right after you learned that lesson, which is you, unfortunately, living in the past. Doesn't have to be that way anymore. You're not allowing yourself to recover. I'm willing to bet that your mistake happened a while ago. I mean, it could have been a couple of minutes, but a lot of times it happened a while back, and you're still buried under its weight. And if anything, the weight's gotten worse because of those thought loops. Remember, more questions lead to less answers. Well, you have to remember that you were a different person before you made that mistake, and you're a different person after it too. The guilt and shame are proof that you're smarter now. Even if your mistake was recent, even seconds ago, you're still smarter now than you were seconds before you made the mistake. That means that you can recall this terrible feeling the next time you're about to make a similar mistake, and try your damnedest to prevent yourself from having this feeling again by choosing not to make that mistake again. This horrible feeling that you're feeling is powerful data for your body to make sure that that lesson gets through. So the next time you're approaching a similar mistake, just tap into the memory of this feeling and use it to stop yourself. Then you're forming a healthier relationship with guilt and shame. You're using it for something positive. You're saying, thanks fellas, but I got this one. I remember you. You do not need to show back up. Remember, you may have messed up, but that terrible feeling of having messed up means that you're already aware that your true self is higher than the self that made that mistake. You're already recovering. Congratulations. Just don't allow yourself to sit in that painful, dirty diaper forever. You do not have to suffer ad nauseum. You have suffered enough. It's time to move forward. Perspective shift number 6. Stop giving the mistake power. When you get caught in thought loops, it's almost like you're working out on a treadmill. You're giving your brain a ton of exercise, but it's the worst possible exercise. Your guilt and shame and fear are forcing you to run laps for the rest of your life, and you're honoring them by doing that. You're giving them power that they do not deserve. They said run, you said how long, and they said forever. Stop giving guilt and shame and fear the power to control your mind. Your mind is needed for other beautiful things, and you cannot focus on those other beautiful things effectively if you're constantly allocating all of your emotional energy to sprinting in circles, which probably won't even get you a good answer in the long run anyways. Take your power back. Shift number 7. See it as a lesson. So maybe you haven't made the shift to seeing the mistake as a lesson. If you haven't done that by now, let's try to make it happen. You were supposed to learn something from this, and you did, even if it sucks, and even if you don't realize it yet. It could just be as simple as making sure that you don't make the mistake again, but it could also be a warning sign not to make a worse mistake in the future. It could be a perspective shift that you were supposed to have. Understand that for some reason, it's really important that your soul specifically had to learn this lesson. You might not find out why for a while, but this lesson matters in your life. Some cosmic reason forced this into your life. We'll talk more about this in shifts number 9 and 14. And that brings me to perspective shift number 8. You had to make that exact mistake. You needed to learn the lesson this way because you wouldn't have learned the lesson any other way. It had to happen like that. You want proof? Because I have proof. You probably had other similar lessons happen before that, but you just didn't learn the big lesson, did you? So life had to throw you a big one. And that is kind of called rock bottom. This proves that the big mistake was necessary because life wasn't able to get its point across to you in smaller ways, so it gave you the old atomic bomb treatment because you wouldn't have gotten the lesson otherwise in any other circumstance. It just wouldn't have hit the same. It sucks, but fate required it. Shift number 9. It prevented way worse mistakes. The guilt and shame that you feel actually prevented worse mistakes from happening. These terrible feelings helped you steer clear of a much darker path. That's why, to some extent, we actually want to thank the guilt and shame. They served us well by cutting off the possibility of total disaster. This mistake actually saved you. But by now, guilt and shame have served their purpose in your heart. They are bitter medicines, but they're still medicines. Remember that medicine is only needed for a season. You take it until you get consistently better, and then what happens next? You stop. But if you keep taking the medicine, it might actually end up hurting you, which is what's going on right now. Keep the lessons that these harsh emotions were teaching you, but stop letting them abuse your mind. I'm pretty sure that you've learned the lessons they were trying to teach you at this point, so I think it's okay to come off that medicine now. Think about it kind of like this. You're letting guilt and shame stop your progress on your dreams. That means that they have become toxic. Are you really worried about making that mistake again? No, I think you know not to make that mistake again. That's not the concern. So if the guilt and shame are helping to prevent another mistake, but you know that another mistake will not reoccur, then why do you need the guilt and shame? Do you see what I'm trying to say here? The lesson is lodged in your brain. Guilt and shame probably aren't necessary to keep it there anymore. Perspective shift number 10. You are not a fake. After a mistake, we can sometimes struggle with the authenticity of our character. Imposter syndrome tries to convince us that we're fake because how can we be a good person inside if we made that kind of mistake? It can feel like the only honest way to move forward is to let the perceived size of this mistake crush our soul, because that's all we're worthy of. And if we're really going to heal that mistake and release it, we would be doing so without having suffered enough. Well, that's wrong. Subconsciously, your brain starts to think that if you heal, then that healing would be unjustified, and it would be a lie. Well, that thought loop has deceived you. It doesn't mean that you're fake at all. You can be a good person and have made a mistake, right? They're not mutually exclusive. You might not enjoy the fact that you made that mistake, but you should take comfort in the fact that there is plenty of good in you. Despite making that mistake, that good is all still there. There might even be more good because of it. This is true even if you don't feel that goodness very much at the moment. I promise, it's there. If imposter syndrome is holding you back from working on your positive mission, please understand that the goodness that you want to do in the world is actually part of your redemption arc and is completely necessary. You need to heal and you need to release this and move forward. It's just that guilt and shame are stun guns that are preventing you from doing that right now. Now, while I completely understand that feeling, please understand this. If you have goodness in you, it is your responsibility to spread it around. You are not barred from uplifting humanity because of a momentary failure of your otherwise pretty good judgment system. If there was a starving child asking you for some food, would you say, "Sorry, kid, I made a mistake in my life. Therefore, I'm not a good enough person to give you this food"? No, of course you wouldn't. It doesn't mean that you're fake because you have the capacity to both mess up and want to help improve the world. It doesn't mean that you're fake because you dropped the ball, but also want to redeem yourself. You're not fake for being a fallible human, but also wanting to grow and be transcendent. Perspective shift number 11. The question may be invalid. When a thought loop opens up, our natural instinct is to try to think through it until we feel better, which quickly leads to more and more questions about ourselves. Thought loops want us to find evidence for being either a good person or a bad person, but it often phrases the proposition in the negative, which would sound something like this. Look at what this mistake implies about you. You're probably a bad person. Go ahead and prove me wrong. But what if the question isn't even valid in the first place? Can't it just simply be that we stepped outside of our character for a moment? You don't have to look for evidence of being a bad person. It was just a lapse in judgment. You also don't have to look for evidence of being a good person either, because whether or not you're a good person wouldn't even be up for debate if you just allow yourself to admit, for God's sake, that you simply had a lapse in judgment. No deep dive necessary, no identity crisis, you simply dropped the ball. The mistake that we made does not need to imply a ton of potentially terrible things about us. It was just a mistake. It doesn't mean that we're just now discovering how horrendous we are as a person deep down inside. We had a temporary hiccup. And all of these questions that we're asking about who we really are inside probably aren't even necessary because we're just not awful people. Thought loops really want us to figure out if we're a bad person or not. And that also subconsciously means that it's really important to us that we're actually a good person. So just consider throwing the question out altogether. Lean into the idea that you are a good person. It was just a momentary judgment lapse, and that mistake does not imply anything larger or more terrible about you as a person. So I hope that's encouraging. Perspective shift number 12. Whose voice are you actually hearing? If you're judging yourself for a past mistake, okay, maybe to some extent that's justified, but what if a lot of what sounds like you questioning yourself is actually just reverberations from other people in your life? Maybe you had a family member that was highly critical of you. Anyone come to mind? Is it possible that they're speaking to you using your voice in your mind? Or maybe it's the voice of a bully, or maybe it's a mean teacher from your childhood, or just a judgmental religious figure, or even just society. Now, the real serious problem here is that all of those people speak in a voice that sounds like yours when they speak to you in your mind. But you have to remember that while you're hearing your own voice, what you're actually hearing is their words. It's your voice, but their words. Try to spend a minute to figure out whose voice is actually judging you in your mind. It could be yours, sure, but it could also be a Trojan horse from a more nefarious character from your past that maybe just has some things left over in you that repeat themselves to you because you believed them. Maybe a person you don't need around anymore. They're toxic. It's definitely worth investigating. Perspective shift number 13. Everyone makes mistakes. You probably feel some cognitive dissonance between you making the mistake, but also somehow wanting to be a good person. We wonder how we can be positive agents at all if we failed so hard in the past. Well, making a mistake does not mean that you're not allowed to help improve the world. If that were the case, then no one would ever improve the world. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone. We forget this because we are the main characters in our own stories, and we only have access to what's in our own minds. But you have to understand that everyone on the face of this earth makes mistakes. Even if you think your mistake is unique or taboo or prosecutable or morally concerning in any way, I'm willing to bet that there are more than 10,000 other human beings right now, who are alive right now, who have made that exact same mistake. And I bet the majority of them want to resolve that mistake too, just as badly as you do. It is the very nature of mistakes that people don't typically talk about them very much. So everyone is left feeling like they are the worst sinner in the world, and everybody else out there has the most justified possible grounds to judge them on it. But that's not the case at all. The mistake that you're suffering from is something that tons of other people carry as a burden too. You are not alone. It's just that you can't read their minds to find that out. You are not by yourself on this one. You have to just allow for the fact that other people make mistakes too, and you're not alone. We have all made mistakes, myself included, and the holiest of the holiest people on this planet have made mistakes. We are human. Mistakes are part of the game, baby. We all carry things that we're not proud of. One of the reasons that you're suffering so much is because your mind just can't verify that other minds are suffering alongside of you, although they are. And both of you could probably use some respite from the guilt and shame of your past mistakes. Perspective shift number 14. The mistake is how you help save the world. Learning the lesson that you learned from making that mistake prevented you from falling down a way darker path. But it also brought you to a way shinier one. What if the lesson that you learned is part of not only you saving yourself from that darker path, but it's also part of you saving the world from a darker path? I'm willing to bet that you can absolutely find a way to use this hard-learned lesson to motivate you to help improve the world somehow. You can 100% find a way to use your lesson to make this planet a better place. You can make a donation, join a cause, or support somebody else suffering from something similar, which is kind of the point of this video. Or you could take the original mistake that you made and push back against the things that are involved in that mistake. You can help prevent this mistake from happening again in the world. You can be the person who fights against the thing that causes this original mistake. Since you know how terrible it feels to make it, you can help prevent it from being made in the future. Get creative with this one. Just remember that your mistake could be how you help save the world. Let me say that again. Your mistake, this thing that you fear, this terrible situation in your life, that thing that's haunting you, looking over your shoulder, that's the black cloud above your head everywhere you go, that mistake could be how you help save the world. Bonus shift number 15. it might be OCD. It's entirely possible that you may have OCD. And I don't mean like, I like things clean and organized OCD like everybody says they have. It's actually far deeper than that, although cleanliness is one of the subsets of OCD. OCD can be debilitating, exhausting, and terrifying. It involves things like distressing thought loops that we went over at the beginning of the video, and constant deep rumination and over-questioning things, checking to verify if something is or isn't a problem, compulsions that hinder everyday life, doubts and fears about life or who you are as a person, things that freeze you in your tracks and make it impossible to move forward. And it usually attacks the things that you find most sacred. It attacks what you love most. If anything in that list sounds like something that you struggle with, you may want to look into OCD and OCD subsets to see if you notice any patterns that seem to make some sense to you. If you feel like something clicks during your research, consider looking into remedies or treatment with a licensed mental health professional. No shame in that at all. Do you ever worry about going to a restaurant when you're hungry? Of course you don't. You honor your brain's request and you go and get some food. Treat mental health the exact same way. Honor your brain's request and go get some help if you need it. Now, I'm very familiar with OCD because I actually have it, and looking into it has helped me understand that my brain just acts a certain way because there's a bit of a hiccup in the current wiring. And you know what? Hiccups in the wiring are actually pretty normal. They just show up a little bit differently from person to person. I actually don't think anybody's totally normal, and that is totally cool. Kind of takes the pressure off a little bit. With that said, OCD is treatable. So again, look into information and treatment if you feel so inclined. It's probably a good idea. So if you're anything like me, my mistakes mentally held me back from pursuing higher things for a very, very unjustifiably long period of time. I felt unworthy of contributing positively to the world because I didn't feel like a good enough person to do so. But I eventually realized that I have to conquer that. And I have to get my goodness out there no matter what, because it is my responsibility and obligation to broadcast my goodness if I have it in me, which I very much do, even if I'm not perfect. You have that same responsibility too. Everyone has that requirement in their life. You are obligated to get your goodness out there. Everyone messes up, but if we let that stop us from helping the world, then the world is doomed. Mistakes cannot prevent us from having a positive effect on this planet. Humanity needs us. It needs me, and it needs you, and whatever beautiful gift you have stored up inside of you that's being held down by a mistake. The world needs the good in you way more than you need to keep punishing yourself for a mistake from your past. Here's a helpful analogy for you. Imagine if somebody went to jail, they served their time, and then they got out of jail and said, "I don't feel like that was enough jail time for what I did. Can you actually send me back?" What? No. They might not feel rehabilitated, but they have served their time. They might have been released from jail by the system, but now they have to release themselves. Now, I'm not saying that your guilt or shame are going to go away, but I am hopeful that they'll at least start to dull a little bit after you use one or more of these perspective shifts. You have to understand that you are already a higher version of yourself for recognizing the mistake as a mistake and feeling so badly about it for so long. But now you have to let that bad feeling go and move into the future version of yourself who you are already. You just have to understand that releasing that pain is an important part of truly assuming your next identity. You do not need that pain anymore. You have the lesson. You are now in the place where you can start to move forward. And you can go ahead and free yourself from the thought loop now as best you can, which is absolutely possible. And even if the thought loop stays, at least you now have some tools to not let it stand in your way forever. Honestly, you might not ever fully release the memory of the mistake, and you might not fully release some of the pain of it either, but you can alchemize that pain into beautiful things if you shift your perspective and agree to grow, rather than being held down and spending your life in a straitjacket of guilt and shame. The most important thing to understand in conquering imposter syndrome is that your positive message is so incredibly important on its own that it needs to force you to overcome absolutely anything that stands in its way. I understand that mistakes can feel soul-crushingly heavy, but we need your positive message to help uplift the world and push back against all the negative things that are floating around out there causing all this damage right now. We all have mistakes in our past that we're not proud of, but it is our responsibility to make the world a better place if we have the ability to do so, which I do and you do. We must improve the world, even if there's some not so great stuff in our past. Which would you rather have? A hero with a complicated origin story or no hero at all? One important disclaimer here, I am not a licensed mental health professional, but I have struggled with this myself, and some of these ideas really have helped me. Just think of me as the friend who cares. I'm here with the aloe for that sunburn. This video is not meant to cure you, it's just meant to help you reframe some things, to help you grow, and to take a step closer to peace, which you very much deserve. It's meant to be just one step that you can take at the beginning of the journey of freeing yourself. And this is one damn good step on that journey, but it won't get you to the top of the mountain all by itself. Do I have all the answers? No, I do not have all the answers, but some of this stuff has really helped me. Am I perfect? Again, no, I am not, but I have made some progress and I wanted to be able to pass that on to you. If something helps, democratize it. These perspective shifts can be incredibly useful in understanding the mistake on a different level, so I hope that they can help you find some freedom or at least some relief. If you connected with this video, you might really benefit from watching my other video on conquering imposter syndrome right here. There are some great analogies in there that I think will really help you move forward. Remember, do something that makes the world a better place this week. People need you. You are the better echo. I'll see you next time.